Oh, well, I was awakened very early this morning by a call from a network telling me that OJ Simpson had died, and I was stunned, shocked. I had no idea that he was even sick. But I noticed that he had not answered a number of my calls and letters over the last year or so, and I figured something must be wrong, because usually we would check in with each other occasionally. I would call on his birthday, things like that, and I didn't get any responses, so I guess he was fighting this disease. But the last time I talked to him, he was pretty happy because he had 2 grandchildren. His 2 children had had children, and it was something that he really cherished. His family, kids, and everybody would come and visit him regularly. And his daughter Arnelle pretty much lived there part-time because she cooked for him and took pretty much care of him. And I, like everyone, was always aware of OJ Simpson.
Sure.
He was that kind of a celebrity. He was everywhere. You know, he was a sports hero. He was on television. He did those great Hertz commercials. He was recognizable, and he was an LA hero, really. I can't think of anyone that was more famous just constantly than OJ was. And I was going on a trip to New York on a vacation because I had been covering the Rodney King trials, and my bureau chief thought I needed a vacation, and I was on my way to New Jersey when I heard the news on the radio that Nicole Simpson had been killed. And I thought, okay, you know, that's a big story, but it's not my beat, really. I only get involved when there are trials. Little did I know. And then the trial happened, and it was extraordinary. And it was time for the verdict, and I still remember the trial had pretty much fallen apart. The prosecution had fallen apart. And I've always said that if I were a juror, I would have acquitted him, because they never proved their case. And I was sitting in my office when the jury was out, and the prosecutor, Marcia Clark, came up to my office, and she said to me, "Do you think we even have a chance?" And I said, "Only if you get a hung jury." And they didn't, and she lost. And it was an extraordinary moment when the verdict was read. The people were wailing in the courtroom. The Goldman family were hysterical. The OJ's son was weeping so loud and just was about to fall on the floor. He was so overwhelmed. OJ was pretty calm. And afterwards it was his son who came out and said, "We're going to find the killer." But they would later say OJ had said that. He never said it. The son said it. Mm-hmm. And then after he got out of jail, he suddenly called me, and out of the blue. I didn't know that someone had told him to call me, because he told a friend that he wanted to talk to a reporter that had been fair in covering the trial. And so he called me, and he said that he just wanted to thank me. And that in itself became an enormous story. And then I covered the second trial, the civil trial. And we remained in touch. He moved to Florida. And at one point I went down to Florida and interviewed him. But then there was the Las Vegas case, which was his undoing, which was the case where he was accused of stealing memorabilia, his own memorabilia that had been bought by other people. OJ, when I talked to him, was always charming. Always, he was a great talker. He loved to talk. That's why I always said if he did it, he would have told somebody, because he just loved to talk. I remember I had a house guest here once, and I was out and the phone rang. It was OJ, and I came home and he said, "Well, I had a very nice conversation with OJ for about an hour."
thick of it.
I would agree that with the people that say that the OJ trial changed reporting on trials. It didn't change trials. Trials are still the same. They still go on. They're still the big famous ones are still going to be big and famous. The routine ones are going to be routine. But it changed the media's perception of what kind of a story this was. And right now, true crime is just a huge thing on TV and everywhere else. And people are fascinated. For one thing, the American public was ushered into a courtroom on TV. A real courtroom. And there was, I had a favorite New Yorker cartoon that came out during that period. It was a boy at the table with his father, and he says, "Dad, can we have a sidebar?"
Yeah.
The terminology was now familiar to everybody. Before the trial, he really was not perceived as a black man. He was kind of colorless. It was his personality and his accomplishments that defined him. And yes, he was a famous black man, but he never played on that until the trial disclosed a lot of racism against him. And Johnny Cochran played on that, and it had a lot to do with the case, because it turned out that the key witness, Mark Foreman, was a racist. So I covered the verdict there. I covered the verdict in civil trial, and then I went to Vegas and covered that. And then he was gone for 9 years in prison in Nevada. And he told me over and over again that he did not commit these crimes. So whether he did or not, we'll never know now. I always said he would take the real story to the grave, and he did.